Welcome to the Stray Pointers podcast, where seemingly ordinary people join us for extraordinary discussions. You're listening to Season 2, Episode 1 of the Stray Pointers podcast. This episode of the Stray Pointers podcast was recorded on January 9th, 2024. I'm your host, Jim Lawless. Please visit straypointers.com for more information about the show, including the show notes for this episode. Tonight, I'd like to welcome author, filmmaker, musician, and editor, Mr. Harrison Demchick. Harrison, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So that's quite a number of hats that you wear. I think a number of those disciplines go back to sort of an interest in writing. So could we talk about your early interests in writing?
Oh, sure. There's not really a time there's not really a time when I wasn't writing. It's hard even to characterize it as an interest, because it's such a fundamental component of who I am, not so much what I do. I actually still have, or my parents still have, it's in my parents' house somewhere, the first story I ever wrote, or at least or at least one of them from maybe kindergarten, maybe earlier,
Really?
which is an illustrated Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles story. Also includes my the first time I made an error, then attempted a half-assed way to explain it, which is not drawing all the characters and then showing them sleeping on the next page by way of explanation. But I've writing was it's my favorite thing to do. In elementary school, it's what I as soon as I realized one could make a living at it, that's what I was going to do.
So prior to writing in kindergarten, you had to have been doing some reading then. Would that be correct?
That would be that would be correct. I was an extremely voracious reader, as a kid. Yeah.
Okay. So you mentioned you just said that you were very happy once you realized you could make a living at this. What period in your life was that epiphany came to you?
I can be very specific about it. It was I was reading I was in seventh or eighth grade reading the letters page of an issue of Amazing Spider-Man. It was an issue by J.M. DeMatteis, where he was, and the letter was commenting on just how much whoever enjoyed his writing, and it was the first time it clicked with me that that hey, this is actually something somebody does for a living,
Mm-hmm.
and it's something I could do for a living. So that's when it crystallized for me that that's a real thing that one can grow up and do.
So were there particular classes you took through your pre-college school years that were geared toward writing?
I actually went to a magnet school for writing for high school.
Okay.
So it was 4 years focused on literary arts at Carver Center for Arts and Technology, where I actually still go back and teach fiction and give talks every year and mentor a student every year. So I'm still very, very connected to that. It's an incredible place, and I credit it with figuring out who I was as a writer,
Mm-hmm.
and really fostering that and allowing me to develop my voice and figure out what that voice actually was. But yes, I was as focused on that as essentially a major through all 4 years of high school.
Okay. Had you received any sort of notoriety for your writing, whether it be in education or outside interests?
At that time,
Yes.
I don't know about notoriety. I mean, it's definitely something that that I enjoy doing. I would like to think I was doing well in middle school.
you have anything published in magazines or anything like that?
Not certainly not in middle school. In high school, I mean, certainly our school literary magazine. I was a I was a finalist in the L. Hubbard's Writer of the Future competition when I was in like 10th or 11th grade. But not that's not quite far enough to get published in in their anthology. But certainly certainly my first you know my first national borderline accolade. Especially on the adult level. And certainly, I mean, there were writing contests they had us submit to in high school, and I was I placed in some of those, but those wouldn't be publications, literary magazines as
Okay.
such. That was primarily any publication would have been within the context of the school.
Okay. So you made it through your high school curriculum that was geared toward writing. I assume you had your eye on going on to writing as a major that whole time. Would that be correct?
That was the plan, yes.
Okay. So was Oberlin your first choice for college then?
Oberlin was my first choice, and I applied early admission and got an early admission. So it's really the only school I applied to. Um, and but the actual creative writing major part it did not that part did not actually go according to plan. I ended up in an English major with a creative writing concentration. Um, what happened with the majors is it's and I can there's a first class you had to take in order to move forward with the major, and I kept applying for it. I kept not getting in, and only after like the third time this had happened, they finally find out why, which is not any which was not the writing samples, but rather the way I answered one of the questions asked on the application, which I was copying and pasting from application to application, but I didn't know that this was the problem.
Okay.
Um, and which talked about finding my voice as a writer at Carver. And because I was saying I had found my voice already, it was being determined that you know, that the major was not something that would be a fit for me. Again, I was not informed about this. So finally, afterwards, I was able to take that class, and everything went fine after that for the concentration, which is in retrospect, was no different and not an issue at all, but certainly felt like an issue at the time.
Hmm. So then when were your first professional publications?
Um, hmm.
Or I made an assumption there. I know that you were employed as a book editor for a while, and now you're basically you run your own business as a book editor, from what I understand now. But which came first, editing or writing professionally?
Professionally, editing came first, and really professionally editing is there. I'm certainly not making a living as a writer at this point. That's I have I get published fairly regularly for short stories and whatnot, but I'm a long way off from getting steady income from that. So editing definitely came first professionally. I started editing in internships between college semesters, and when I graduated, I moved to doing that full time.
Okay. So what was your first professional writing gig?
Um, well, it didn't come so much in the form of well, okay, so I guess that would be at the publisher, because initially amongst my duties, this was a small press, Bancroft Press, and because it was as small as it was, really just the publisher and me and maybe whatever other intern was around at the time. Um, Everybody does everything, so one amongst my duties alongside editing and and marketing and everything else that goes with book publishing, I was also you know working on adaptations or figuring out how to get our projects to film production companies, and to agents and so forth. And part of this was conceptualizing how these projects could work as screenplays, and ultimately, um, um, the publisher felt I was doing that well enough that I should just go ahead and write some screenplays.
Okay.
So writing screenplay adaptations of our books was actually a significant part of my job, in the time I worked at Bancroft Press. Obviously, the first ones I did that first summer were truly awful, and probably the next several after that as well. But eventually, I figured out what I was doing, and so yeah. So given that was part of the job, I suppose that was my first writing gig, writing screen adaptations of our books.
Okay. And do you think that the writing the screenplays, the adaptations that you did, were the building blocks for you writing your own screenplay, Ape Canyon?
Absolutely. A- Screenwriting is a fundamentally different language than writing prose and writing novels or short stories. So as with any language, you have to learn it, and you have and so I used to have. I can't remember how many screenplays you're supposed to. It's said that you need to write before you actually learn how to do it. I used to have a specific number for that I'd read somewhere, but either way, it's quite a bit. And learning how to conceive a story in that way, and how to you know how to present what you're seeing in your head on the page in script in script form, and learning three-act structure and how all that breaks down. And
Now,
it's
now
really,
if I
really,
can
really, yes.
if I can interrupt and ask,
Mhm,
then when you were writing for Bancroft, when you were doing the adaptations for Bancroft,
mhm,
I
mhm.
assume you were getting feedback from someone that kind of helped you polish those rough areas. Who were those people that were helping you out?
Well, I mean, fundamentally, the publisher Bruce Sports, his feedback on anything that's writing was always absolutely invaluable. Um, Also, really anybody else who was working there at any given moment, yeah, as again, usually as an intern, we always had interns coming and going, would also read those and provide feedback. And they're also, and there were, friends I would send them to, or sometimes actually those friends would become interns. But really anybody who was around to read them was providing me feedback, and at the same time I was reading books on screenwriting. The publisher gave me books on screenwriting to continue to learn from and continue to grow. And 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 so it's really through that process, and through try through a lot of trial and error and reading screenplays and so forth, and learning how to do them
Okay,
effectively.
okay. Okay, I'm sorry. I detoured us. We were talking about Ape Canyon
Mhm.
and you writing that screenplay. So was that the first screenplay that you had given the thought to try to bring to the big screen?
Oh no, I mean, I would have been happy to bring any of them to the big screen, and that included a number of adaptations and a couple other and a couple other originals. But it was less a matter of targeting anything for Ape Canyon and more. Well, I had been accepted into the um, Johns Hopkins University's Salzance what the I'm blanking on the full name of it, but it was a fellowship. It was an opportunity. It was a workshop to where I and five other or four other writers had were able to uh, get feedback from other produced professional screenwriters, and for it was intensive like 4 days of constant feedback and development. And in the course of that program, um, one of my fellow one of my fellow participants, actually, sorry, I did that, and that was for a different screenplay entirely called Time Traveling Idea Bandits. And I also had that screenplay placing it also placed third in the Baltimore Screenwriters Contest that year. So I went to the Maryland Film Festival, and there was a talk that I went to on independent film financing. And I saw that, and for the first, and it got me thinking that I think actually I could probably do that. That I've been submitting screenplays to production companies for years, and I'd gotten some promising results. I got a film option. I'd been working with a production company for a couple years on another project, so I'd had some things going, but it always fizzled out. So the idea emerged of actually making it happen on my own, or finding people to make it happen with. And so I went to one of my fellows from the from the Johns Hopkins Saul Zaentz um, Innovation Fund, and who's a professor at Hopkins. He introduced me to a couple of his students who were making films, and that was Josh Land and Victor Fink, and I sent them a number of possible. I met with them. We seemed to be on the same page and a number of possibilities. I was thinking actually we'd do a short, and maybe a short based on one of my short horror stories, something like that. And I learned from them. I got the same response from a number of people that it's not often financially viable to do a short, or rather, there's not really an opportunity for it to make its money back. There aren't a lot of opportunities for people to see shorts.
Oh, that's
So
interesting. Mhm.
they were more interested in a feature. I had sent them Ape Canyon. Ape Canyon really resonated with them, and it became what they wanted to do. So I would have happily gone forward with anything I had written, but Ape Canyon was what resonated with them, and it's a screenplay that I loved. So we moved forward with that.
And then was that your first big published screenplay as far as seeing it to completion on film, and you can see it on YouTube and Amazon and all that sort of thing?
Yes, as my first film, and it was a several years process from there. Putting everything together. I would not be excited to sit in the producer's chair again. It's not part of the process I enjoy, but it's an extraordinary learning experience, and I'm really proud of the film that came from. But yes, that was certainly my first produced film, and it was a remarkable thing to watch it come to life.
Okay, very good. Okay, let's talk a little bit about other things that you've written. So
Mhm.
you've written a horror novel called The Listeners.
Yes.
What is can you give us the two-sentence description of that book?
For years I could have given a two-sentence description of that book. I haven't had to go back to that one in a long while. Let's see, how do I say it? In a borough quarantined by by a plague that brings deformity, insanity, and death, a 14-year-old boy named Daniel, orphaned by the plague, is caught up with a one-eared gang slash cult called the Listeners. Wow, that was still in my head.
Yeah, I do have a copy of that from your website, and that was almost word for word. So that's pretty good. Now that was back from 2012. So this book was from 12 years ago.
Mhm.
Was horror a genre that you prefer to write in? I mean, has it been an interest of yours?
It certainly has developed into such thing. I actually did not. I did not see that as horror as I was writing it for quite a while.
Okay.
Um, and it started out it started as a collection of short stories that I was doing for a senior project in at Oberlin. And and the quarantine was there, and the listeners were there, so it had the horror elements, but I was seeing it as a as a scenario that could spawn a number of interesting stories. Seeing it more on on a character basis, and it took some time to realize that it was a horror story. Um, and yeah, at this point, I'm certainly well aware that a lot of what I write is horror and magical realism, but it's always coming fundamentally from a place of character drama. So that's really what it ends up being first.
Okay. Now, I there are certain writers who come up with ideas that I would never come up with. So, a one-eared gang cult called the Listeners. What was the genesis of that idea? That everybody has a single ear, and they're called the Listeners.
Yeah, they cut off one ear, so like cut off the writers so that they can hear the truth. I think
Oh,
was the rationale for them.
okay.
Um, yeah, it's I'm it's my own book, but I am, over time a bit rustier on some of the specific details.
There,
Um,
there was another short story of yours that I think I was reading the description for, and I don't know if it's a recent or a one from a bit ago, but there appeared to be somebody in a car following another car, and that car that they were behind was themselves. It had that was the same make of the car, same license plate, everything like that.
yes.
Where do these sorts of ideas come from?
That's tailgating. And I don't actually think I'm extraordinarily good at ideas. Like I'm good at execution. And that's sort of where the editor brain combines with the author brain that I have a really good sense of structure and
Hmm.
how to develop an idea. But but there are some writers I know who are just a constant fountain of compelling ideas, and I don't have that. But on occasion I'll come up with something, and I will write that thing down and go back to it at some point. I try to hold on to the ones I do have so that I can return to them at a time where I'm looking for a new project to work on. Tailgating was a and I don't know where they came from specifically. That was just something that felt like a good Twilight Zone idea that yeah, that popped into my head at some point. The yeah the listeners was inspired. That's a lot of inspiration from zombie movies and such. I don't like the actual the specific philosophy of the gang. I think is probably largely unique to me, but a lot of what's there is just it's not extraordinarily original concept. It's just hopefully executed in a way that's distinct and interesting.
Okay. Do you use any mechanisms to try to, to try to bring random things together and try to form stories out of them or anything like that?
Um, I don't know about mechanism. I'm a fairly thorough outliner. I believe very much in outlines and as an essential part of the writing process for me as I'm developing a story. I've reached a point where sometimes I don't do it for short stories. If I have an idea from percolate, sometimes I just want to write it and get it out and see how it comes out. But for most projects, and certainly for any longer novel or screenplay, I outlined fairly in depth, both in terms of plot and developing each individual character and what that character wants and needs, and trying to figure out the pieces that way before I actually dive into the writing process.
Where I was really going with that would been
Mhm.
along the lines of there was a movie years ago with Michael J. Fox and Joan Jett where they're bar musicians trying to make it big, and Michael J. Fox's character is sitting on the couch with his nephew and he's got his guitar, and he turns on the TV really quick, and whatever show was on, someone said, "We got no place to go," and he shut off the TV, and that was the hook for the song. Then he's all right, we're gonna write a song now called "We Got No Place to Go." Do you use anything like that?
I don't, although one thing I've wanted to try to do, and I haven't done this yet, is there are a number of if you look at calls for submissions for literary magazines, there are a number that are going for stories that begin with this sentence or stories that have this theme. And at some point, I would like to just devote myself to responding to some of those and
Okay.
seeing where that takes me. Because it can be good to try different ways of coming to concepts and coming to ideas and working from prompts that might take you in a different direction that you would go yourself. So it's something that I would you know like doing more of, but I don't have a particular strategy like that. It's just a matter of if something comes to me, I just try to make a point of writing it down so that I don't forget about it, and I hope that I can do something with it later. And sometimes it works that way. Sometimes there are things that those are vague ideas that years later can actually become something big and fully developed. The like this past summer, I wrote a horror screenplay I'm really happy with called "Let Me Into Your House," and all I had of that for years was just you know an old woman with a shotgun in front of a locked door of our house with a bunch of hands or with a bunch of hands beating at the door on the outside, shouting, "Let me into your house! Let me into your house! Let me into your house!" And that's all I had for years. And then I thought, okay, I'm actually going to focus on this, and it actually turned into a pretty compelling story. Um, so I was holding on to those things and giving them a chance to eventually become something.
Okay. So have any of your published works in any media led to, attaining somehow moving further toward what you want to achieve? Has your book writing helped to lend itself to screenwriting, things like that?
Um, I think all these things play off one another in some form. It's it hasn't been a direct route for anything. Like there's no instance where where somebody says, "Hey, I loved your novel. Want to make this movie." That sort of thing hasn't happened. But you know but the novel did lead to a film adaptation and a screen adaptation of that, or not to a film adaptation, to a screen adaptation that was optioned for film. Um, and so I had contacts there, and that led to other projects. Those projects were not made, but those things helped me grow as a screenwriter, and those things were added to my resume as a screenwriter. Um, and all those things eventually lead to the connections that allow Ape Canyon to happen. And because Ape Canyon happened, I'm still working with those directors. So so earlier or sometime last year, we have a horror short called The Farmhouse, which is a short adapted from a longer project we want to do. And that won Best Horror at Austin After Dark. That's something that comes about because my ongoing creative relationship with Josh Land and Victor Fink and their company Mind in Motion. Um, so there are always things like that, and I would like to think that you know that uh, the short stories that I've been having published over the last several years, they also provide a resume so that as I pitch my novel, I can point to, well, these are all the other publications I have by other people who thought I was good enough to publish. So it's not so nothing has been a huge hit yet, such that would obviously lead to the next thing. But these things pile up over time, and they're all moving forward, even if the connections from one to the other are not necessarily clear or obvious in the moment.
Okay, fair enough. So let's talk a little bit about your work as a professional editor.
Mhm.
You had you had worked at Bancroft,
Yes.
and now you're I said freelance earlier, but basically you run your own business. I mean, you're self-employed as an
Mhm.
editor. Is that correct?
Yes, I work with an editorial freelance boutique called The Writer's Ally, and I get a lot of work through a site called Readsy. But fundamentally, I'm a freelancer.
And I took a look at Goodreads, and there's a query on your website you can run on Goodreads to list the books that you had edited. And I
Hmm.
don't know if it's limited to your freelancing or if it was anything for Bancroft, but I see I counted 87 books so far on Goodreads, and most of the marks for these books were all very good. Do how do the authors of some of these books, I assume you get both negative and positive feedback, because that'll happen in anything you do, but I'm just curious as to what type of feedback you get from the prospective authors as you're going through the editing process.
Um, well, I find that most authors, have, especially in freelance, having and they've taken the time to realize that they need an outside eye on their work. So I don't get a lot of negative feedback because they're eager to learn and to grow as authors, and I would certainly think that that's why I'm very, very good at providing that. I'm like, I'm pleased to say that I have I have like I don't know how many reviews I have on Readsy, which is my primary source of work at this point. But they're all across the board 5 stars. And so it is generally a positive response from the authors I work with. I think that's a part of or like it's part of developing a good relationship between editor and author that my role in that process is to help them develop their work into the best version of itself and help them achieve their vision. So as long as I'm doing that and they are growing, they're seeing the improvement in their own work, which they always do, because work always does get better when you devote yourself to it and when you have to improving your craft. As long as that's the case, it's almost always a positive relationship.
What was the genesis of the decision to strike out on your own?
Um, it was largely about wanting to focus more of my energies on the part of the job that I loved. Um, as I said before, working at a small press like Bancroft, you do everything. So I was definitely editing books, and I was definitely writing adaptations, and I love doing both of those things. Um, but there's also a lot of marketing, which is important. It's extremely important, and you have to know how to do it. But it's not. It's certainly not what I. It's certainly not something I loved. Shipping books out, didn't love that. And these are all things these are all extremely valuable things for me to have done. But but I was reaching a point where you know, where I wanted to be an editor and be just an editor, and but I really loved that that part of the work, and simultaneously the industry was changing. My time in traditional publishing is also like it's like when I started editing, there was no such thing as an ebook, and when I left Bancroft, the ebooks were everything, and it wasn't that long a span in the grand scheme of things, but the industry changed dramatically, such that self-publishing had developed into a force in its own right that it had not been before, and it's with legitimacy it had not had before. So, as a freelance editor, I was in a position to work with people pursuing traditional publishing and people pursuing self-publishing. Um, so I mean, before that, there were times earlier in my career where I'm thinking, well, maybe I'll go to work for one of the big five publishers, like a Penguin or a Random House. But the industry went in a different direction, and which is fine by me because freelance work suits me better anyway. So it's really a matter of of having an opportunity to really concentrate more on what I loved about what I did.
Okay. Now, uh, I'm not sure. I know of some of your other interests too, so I'm going to pull a question kind of out of the blue here.
Mhm.
But I haven't seen you speak, but I have seen pictures of you at a panel at AwesomeCon, if I remember correctly.
Yes. Mhm.
Uh, what were you what were you speaking about at that panel?
And I don't know because we actually do that every year. That 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 I've done a number of solo talks at AwesomeCon. I've done and more recently I switched to panels because I'm lazy and having other people talk as well is easier. Um, but no, it's a good way to like these are usually talks on writing on craft in some form or another. And AwesomeCon is one venue for them, but I've spoken at conferences and organizations and and I've done done just kind of done Mid Atlantic something or other Beta Ocean. I've Maryland Writers Association conference. A lot of I've done Regia in Boston. I spoke to the Atlanta Writers Group in Atlanta. It's there are a number of groups I've had a chance to speak for. And that's that. And I just said that one of the reasons I went into freelance, I didn't want to do as much marketing. We still have to do some marketing. So that historically has been one of the ways that that I build my profile, and it's usually in association with the Writers Ally, the boutique I work with, so building their profile as well. But these are talks about or often about the mechanics of writing. Like I have a talk on how character and conflict relate to one another. I have a talk on screenplay structure as story structure, and I have a talk on the role of logic in fiction. And I have found that like a lot of the reasons I can be good at what I do is I'm good at communicating the principles of writing, in an effective and way. So when I do that in front of an audience, it's trying to find a fun and quirky way to convey that information, and making it weird but clear and enjoyable. And that's usually what I'm doing at a conference like that. It's not my favorite thing to do because anything that puts me in a position where there's a lot of social interaction is not my natural strength. But but writing but writing and crafting is, and giving a talk, developing a talk is crafting lesson explanation. It has an arc of its own. So I found that even though I don't you know love the energy that goes into the actual presentation, I actually do like developing them, and I actually do have an knack for explaining things in a way that aspiring authors respond to.
Do you see yourself as ever taking up the profession of teaching?
Well, I do some teaching. I mentioned before that I teach fiction at my old high school.
Oh, that's right.
I do that every year. I run a fiction seminar for the seniors. Um, I mean, teaching writing is something I enjoy, helping young authors, learn, develop the writing, something I love in particular, because I see a lot of myself especially at Carver, obviously, because I was a student there.
Hmm.
So it's always the same group of weirdos it was when I was there. Um, and but yes, I mean, editing fundamentally, or the way I approach editing, is fundamentally as a form of teaching. That it's basically providing, as best in providing an author basically a 101 college course in writing with their work as the example. So I'm always trying to help not only develop the work into a better novel, or a better memoir, whatever it happens to be, but also to develop them into better writers.
Hmm.
So teaching is always at the core of that. So whether it's an editorial letter, or a lecture, or a classroom, it's fundamentally the same thing.
Okay. So what's on the horizon for Harrison Demchick? What new worlds will you conquer?
Um, there are always a number of things, in some level of completion or progress. See, right now, I'm continuing to pitch my middle grade horror novel, Nowhere in the Nighttime Things. Um, that's a project I'm very proud of, and still seeking out a publisher for that. Um, right now, I'm working on on a feature version of a short screenplay that um, finished top three in the Holly Shorts screenwriting competition back in the summer. That put me in touch with the head of a film group called The Summit, which provides the grand prize for that competition, and they expressed interest in a feature version of the same story. So I've been working on developing that. So you asked before about how that connection is one thing leading to the next. So we'll see if that becomes one of those. That's my primary writing project right now, while I continue to pitch Nowhere in the Nighttime Things. Simultaneously, I wrote another short for Josh and Victor, that I believe they mean to film sometime, I think in the spring, maybe thereabouts. So that would be that'd be a third film project, and we're hoping also to get financing for the feature version of The Farmhouse, which is the short that won Best Horror last year at Austin After Dark. See, those are probably the primary active projects right now. But I also have I have a new short story coming out in it's coming out in an anthology in like I said, I'm not exactly sure when it's due out. I know I have some revisions to do to it over the weekend, in preparation for that. Let me see if I'm searching to see if I can find the remember what the title of it, not title of the story, and the title of the story. Title of the story is Rent Control, but the title of the publication, because I feel like it would be a missed opportunity if I didn't actually mention this. Yeah, Speculative City is the name of the publication. And Rent Control is the story. I'm not sure exactly when it'll come out, but sometime probably in the first half of this year. Um, and Yeah, so that is the next published work coming out for sure, alongside the other projects I'm working on.
That's quite a busy horizon.
Yeah, I mean, there's always yeah, yeah, I make it a point, like my practice is to always write, at least 3 hours every weekend.
Wow, that's great.
So and you're right, writing is one of those, like, it doesn't get done if you don't make time for it consistently. And that's one,
Mhm.
and that's so so as long as I'm doing that, I'm always working on something. I'm always reaching the end of a project. I'm always starting a new project. So in that way, I've been working that consistently, and I think it's the only way to get things done. But in that way, there are always a number of irons in the fire.
Oh, okay, great. Well, Harrison, thanks for joining us tonight. It was great having you on.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening. Let's do this again soon. Take care.